Good morning. Hemshech Chaim Beis, we've concluded, but we're going into deeper in understanding of Yichud, the unification, which is a central theme of Chaim Beis, especially it concludes with the ultimate uniting of recognizing how existence itself is an extension, at least from the perspective of Atzmus, of godliness itself, of Atzmus. And of course, the goal is that we should be miyached Hashem in that way, and we should experience it. So we're learning the Toras Sholom, and sum up in a minute what we've learned. I want to start also by saying that our learning here, of course, schus and merit of what is on front and center in all our minds and hearts and souls, and that is Eretz Yisrael, our holy brothers and sisters and children in the Holy Land. God should protect the hostages to come out all unscathed, intact. Two are released, but all of them, as well as protecting the people of our Moshe Nefesh, the soldiers and military front lines, to defend and protect the promise of the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. And God protects Yisrael, all Jews everywhere, especially in Eretz Yisrael. And we should continue fighting our end of the battle, which is the spiritual, the psychological, emotional strength that's necessary. Every military needs to also have confidence, not just firepower, to know that they will, fighting the right cause, the good cause, and that we will prevail. I just recorded tonight's My Life, talked a lot about that. This week's chapter, quite fascinating, that it should be so prescient and directly relevant to the issues going on. So check that out tonight. So with that, that's the schus of our learning. If anybody wants to mention a name that you know or think we should mention, I mean, I wish I could mention all the hostages' names. I don't know them all. And of course, Hashem should bring the chama to all the shattered families, this brutal massacre that will never be forgotten by us, as we also build and show how light is stronger than darkness, which is very much part of why we're learning. Not we're oblivious to what's going on, we're not escaping. We're simply channeling our anger and grief through Torah, Chassidus, to bring the ultimate geula that will solve all these problems. Amen to that. Okay.
Amen.
So, with that said, I mean, if you think about it, what more important message today is to find God everywhere, the Yichud. And sometimes difficult to see in times of war, in times of pain. You know, it's easier to see God when things are nice and beautiful. But that's part of the mitzvah, is to be miyachid, like he says, Hashem mitzada elamus. So a good segue. So let me sum up what we are reading. So basically, you started on page 194. We're up to now, I believe, not 196. So summing up, that the mitzvah of Yichud, our mitzvah, is on Atzmus. Not Natzilus, not Ak, not the other worlds. It's Atzmus. Atzmus, it's a mitzvah to demonstrate how God is exclusive, the only true reality. And everything is an extension of that. So in other words, there's nothing exists but Atzmus. How we reconcile that with the fact that there is a world, that needs explanation. And there's the explanations of Bittul, the explanations of Yichud. That's another expression of godliness. Remember, the fact that we don't see the world as one with God is just our limited vision due to the Tzimtzum and the Parsa. But the reality is, it is that way. But to manifest that reality, that's our Havaya. That's from the beginning of time. When Adam and Chava ate from the tree of knowledge, 5,784 years ago, it was due to the concealment. How were they able to transgress? Because there's a Tzimtzum and a Parsa. So despite the fact that the reality is not that way, meaning that God is really behind it all, but a work of let's call countering the Tzimtzum and transforming it is tremendously hard work. Look how many years it's taken. And we still have these halamas v'estadim, Rahman al-Itzlan, that we just saw and we've seen in the past. So let's not dismiss that Tzimtzum and Parsa have done an effective job of deluding people into thinking God is not around. or that God is and therefore can behave the way we can behave. But our job remains to be miyachid elokus in this world. Okay, so that's Atzmus. Then on page 196, the first column, which we read, that in this yichud there are two efanim. Let's just sum up a few key points here. Mamayla lamata. Well, he starts mamata lamayla, from the bottom up and from the top down. We haven't yet really discussed the difference between them. We just discussed the two and how mamayla lamata has something that mata lamayla doesn't have, which I'll sum up now. But before that, he began with a hagdama. We're not talking now not just the fact that we're aware that God is the only reality. That's God, that is true. But more than that, that's not hard to know. Everyone who has faith believes that God is the only true reality. What then is the mitzvah? Now, the is that even from our vantage point in existence, in a world where there is concealment, that's the mitzvah. What would you need a mitzvah if we're just coming aware of a reality that God is unique and one and the only one and so on? That's a statement. The key chiddush here is that we in existence and with all the tzimtzum in the pasuk should come to be miyachad. That's a mitzvah. That's something that's a big accomplishment. That's what he says. Mitzada elamus. Now, in that process, there are two ways, which also helps us explain that mamat l'mayla and mayla is not just two ways to appreciate God. It's two ways to experience God in existence. That's the key thing to remember. So he says, Mamayla lamata has a mila over matla mila, because you're getting there a picture from above. It's like God revealing himself to us. So even though we may not be kalim for it completely, but there is a revelation, and it's God in his purity. Mamata l'mayla requires us our hard work of discovering it through our own lives. So even though we're going to learn that that's far more pneumistic, and that's the ultimate goal, but if you talk about sheer firepower, giluyim, ata reis ladas matan teira, God revealed himself. Vayered Hashem al har Sinai. So he explained the example, and I cited where in Ayin Beis he talks about this, the 2 pages I mentioned in the last class. So one person is standing at a higher place, on a higher location. Think of it like a top of a mountain, if you wish. That's what I think the example he gives there. Here he doesn't mention mountain. He just says a mokim naila, and someone else is a mokim nomach, lower place. How can these two meet? There's 2 ways. Either the one below climbs, or the one that above descends. So he says, when the tachton has to climb, it's a whole bunch of requirements are necessary and many impediments. Yes, there are a number of impediments. Yes, there are stones and there are boulders, and who knows what's in his way as he climbs. He needs to be a bal koyach. He needs to have strength to climb. You need to have energy, and then he needs tools. Levushim he calls. Levushim is garments and tools. Not just how he dresses, actual tools that help him climb. And finally, his climbing is commensurate to his effort. You know, he may climb and end up meeting with the one above, but he may be exhausted, or he may not even really fully appreciate it, whatever. Mashenkein, B'yididus ha'elyon lamata, ein kan shum meniz v'yikuvim. Atzmus, the way it is, it comes down. That's what mamay lamata means. And he said the same thing in Aveda. If you go mamata lamayla, you have to go balkeach, and you have to reveal the deeper strengths of the nefesh halakis, because it has to deal with an animal soul, and you need levushim, which he calls the asis of Teira Tefillah. But when the Elyon comes down lamata, odo ken zayin ad Atzmus kameshu zol yered zayin lamata. Ken zayin. It could be other ways, but it's also possible, like he says, even though the below is not yet refined. So like by Matan Teira, vayered halashis Sinai. The Jewish people were not fully there, just come out of Mitzrayim. And Mitzrayim, he says, there's nothing lower than that. And nevertheless, there was a Esgalos of Atzmus. So this then applies also to the two forms of yichud. Azeh zeichen the beze fana yichud and the yichud from momatl ma'al kumpnit tzutza atzmus. The in dem yichud fun momayla lamata. That's where we stopped, close to the bottom of the second column on 196. So it's two forms. Now, I just want to point out, I'm going to talk about this later more at length, but going back to Ayin Beis, as I mentioned, the first, when the Rebbe Rashab in volume 2 began to talk about the two ways, Aremimcha Hashem Elokai HaMelech, Mamata Lamayla, Mamay Lamata, first he spoke 550 pages, Mamata Lamayla, which is primarily through davening, which means our effort climbing from the bottom up. On page 1350 in volume 3, he began talking about Mamay Lamata, that Hashem gave us a gift. He gave us Torah. Torah is God's Torah, is God's blueprint. Think for a moment, imagine, God forbid, we didn't have a Torah. So yes, could we reach godliness through our own effort? Of course we can. You contemplate on nature, on the design of existence, intelligent person, prayer, things from below where you come to realize there's something above. But Torah gave us a snapshot of how existence looks from the bird's eye view. God says, here's my Torah. In this Torah is my blueprint. I've invested myself, infused myself within these words. I'm telling you what my mitzvahs are, like we're learning here that mitzvahs come from Atzmus. Some mitzvahs we could have come to on our own. Mitzvah like, for example, charity or kindness. But a lot of mitzvahs we never would have come to on our own. They're completely divine mitzvahs. They're all divine. But some, you could say, Seichel would have also arrived. The Gemara says, had we not given the Torah, and the Rebbe Rashab asks, Toras Sholom, we would learn tznius, modesty from a cat, and other qualities and virtues and values from different parts of nature. But that would have been an effort from below. The Torah given from Umayla, that's a big part of what we have not really concluded in Ayin Beis. He's talked a lot about what the Torah does, Torah Riyah. That's why I also felt learning this in Toras Sholom is going to help us understand the quality of Mamayla Lamata Matlamayla, which we can then, with that, understand better where the Rebbe Rashab may have gone to in this conclusion of Ayin Beis in summing up these two perspectives. It's because the Yichud Mamayla Lamata Matlamayla. That's another reason among other things so the Yichud here is critical. Remember, Yichud Tata, Yichud Ilah, and then the joining of those two. Okay. So now I'm ready to continue reading unless somebody wants to ask anything. As I said, I'm going to try to move through this as fast as possible to get the points we need to get. I want to really go back. This is not a digression from Ayin Beis. To me, it's all about helping us understand, firstly, what we've learned, and also try to then paint the picture of what would have developed. So we have more to go here. Okay, ready to read? So I'm reading at the bottom of column 2, page 196 in Toras Sholom. If you want to follow along, we posted it on the group. And even if you're not following, I'll explain everything in simple English. So don't be concerned if you don't have the text in front of you. Okay. So now he says, so now the two types of Veda, two types of Yichud. So now he says, is Kishem, we're talking here now like 11 lines from the bottom. So he says like this. The Yichud Mamayla doesn't have, the Yichud from the bottom up is not quite like the Yichud from the top down. In this element, that you get more of a snapshot, like the Mashpia is revealing himself to you, not just the Makabel doing his effort to try to understand or experience the Mashpia. So he continues. Is Kishem v'in Aveda was b'keach Asmei. So just as it is in Aveda b'keach Asmei, this is Mamat Lamayla, self-generated effort. This is something just to drive the point home. We deal with this every time you educate your children. You communicate with your children. Every educator, any communication, we know there's two parts to it. There's what you, so to speak, teach your student or child, and then there's what you do to motivate them that they should generate. Real education, you want them to Like you'll ask a question and say, what do you think? That's what you're trying to evoke is a Mamat L'Mayla response because you want them to own it. Then you give them the answer. So we know good education is you don't just give them question and answer. You teach them how to answer a question by getting them and you're training them. But at times you do need to give them a lead or you need to give them direction or an example. Like, very often you'll see in different quizzes or questionnaires, they'll give you the first answer and then just to get you going. And then the next you have to answer. So that in just a very balabatish practical way is a mamayla mata, mamat lamayla experience. So it's all about. So he says, so just as there's an aveda, is an aveda b'keach atzmei, which means your effort, your self-generated effort. But das wird angerufen, der aveda von v'chol kirvi, Hashem koche. That's called v'chol kirvi. The chol kirvi means from my inners. Hashem koche. It's not coming from above, it's coming from within you. Das is the aveda von lamata mahaparsa. That's the Aveda below the Parsa. After the partition that has concealed the divine, so now what do you have? You have some light, but it's coming after the concealment, after the partition. So the only way back is through your effort. Unless, of course, there's a revelation from above. But we're talking now that the Parsa has concealed that which is above. So in Atzilus, let's say, things are intact. We learned before, it's a Elam HaYichud, it's a united world. It experiences godliness in a higher level. But after the Parsa, that's where the Aveda b'kayach atzma is necessary. What's that? Horovet midi kishkes. Kirbi is kishkes. Kirbi is actually kirbayim, like we learned, the innards, the gut, the inner gut, the stomach. So he says, in Yiddish, he calls it at horovet. He struggles with the kishkes. Kishkes means with the intestines. I'm sure you've heard the word in Yiddish, kishkes. Like, from the very innards of yourself. Kishkis is the innards, yeah. So he's horoving. He's struggling with it. Kumte doch durch dem nitzutz Atzmus. So despite that, the struggle is very commendable and powerful and important, and we'll learn more about it. But he doesn't come to Atzmus because the focus there is you breaking through and trying to understand, appreciate it. So the value of it is that you're getting there. But the pure so-called image of Atzmus doesn't come to Atzmus as when it comes from a mile lamata. So just like an Aveda, the Aveda with your self-generated effort, like he says in the Gemara, that a person desires one measure of their own more than 9 measures that you get as a gift. Why? Because it's coming from you. So there has that quality. But pure quantity, 9 measures, is a lot more than 1. So he says, so that's how it's an Aveda. Same thing in the Yichud. Then Yichud too, that's the case. That the Yichud that you do when you look at existence, for example, you come from the art to appreciate the artist, from the structure to appreciate the architect. You're not quite going to see the architect on his own. You're going to see it through the lens and through the filter of the art. Like we've discussed many times the example. You look at art, yes, you can extrapolate and you can come to the conclusion that there's an artist. You could even probably figure out something about the artist. Why did he make this image? What does it reflect? But can you say you're getting a picture of who the artist is and his entire life? Not necessarily, because he didn't invest everything into the art. There's so much more to him. And there's also other types of art he may have created to really reflect more of him. And then there's all of him that's not an artist. He's beyond being an artist. Going back to my one of my favorite examples. So in that sense, Mamata Lamaila, yes, you heard of it with your kishkis. You worked hard to appreciate godliness through the art, but it's not the same as the yichud. In other words, and you've therefore discovered that this art is one with the artist, the yichud Mamata Lamaila, but it's not quite the same as when the artist reveals himself and says, hey, let me show you who I am. Like it happened by Matan Torah. He's just equating the Aveda with the Yichud. That just like an Aveda, it's not quite Atzmus, the same thing in the Yichud. Because like we spoke earlier, we're dealing with Yichud of Atzmus. We're not talking about Atzilus. Atzmus is in them Yichud from a Matla Maila. So therefore, in this unification that comes from the bottom up, meaning through existence, we come to, like the Rambam says. So how do you come to love and reverence of God? You contemplate on the design and the beauty and the grandeur of existence. He says, so this yichud mamat l'mayla is kosh is doch a mitzvah, even though it's a mitzvah, absolutely. Next page, 197. Was men hat doch das gegeben l'mayla, and this mitzvah was given to us from above. He's qualifying and saying, even the mitzvah that we do from the bottom up was also given to us from above. But kol mokem, nevertheless, kupmen durch dem eich nit zu Atzmus. You don't quite reach Atzmus, even though this mitzvah was given to us from above. But the mitzvah, the process, mamat l'mayla, is through us, is through our lens. And through our lens, you're going to have a limited picture, even though qualitatively it's very internalized. I'm qualifying just to make sure that he's not trying to dismiss mamat l'mayla, or else we wouldn't have a mamat l'mayla. We would just have mamat l'mata. There's plenty of value to it. I think he's going to talk about the details of it. But regardless, we'll get to that. Right now, he's emphasizing here what you don't have, which is the pure picture of Atzmus, the face of so-called God himself. Das gegeben, man kommt durch dem echt nicht zu Atzmus. Is echt im Meile lamata. So now he's going back to Mamayla Lamata. We'll see where he goes with this. I'm not sure. So too now Mamayla Lamata, when you come from the top down, is Kishem vi in Yiridis Elyon Lamata. Just as So he could compare, just like when a person climbs from the bottom up, so that all that effort that's necessary and so on. And therefore so just like the Avodah is the Yichud, so now he's saying the same thing when the person on top goes downward. So he's saying, when the higher level comes down below, which is, like we said, does not require the same level of effort and so on, and doesn't have all those impediments, that too will reflect how it's a yichud mamayla lamata. So let's read it. Is kishem v'yirida elyon lamata, just as it is when the upper level comes down below. V'dos is mitzad atzmei. That's not through effort. That's coming from above. It's not you. It's not that the one below has elicited that. I think that's what he means. That mitzad atzmei. Verdoch do nimshach der atzmus. So now the atzmus is coming down on his terms. He's choosing to come down. Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. He's choosing to come down. Remember, he said God could also come down in a concealed way, but he could choose to come down like by Matan Torah without garments, where you saw Ata Reisel Adas. The Alter Rebbe teaches Ata Atzmus. You Atzmus revealed yourself. He says is eich in the yichud from a mile lamata. So here also the yichud, when we meyachad Hashem, meaning us below, are looking of how to connect God to existence from the top down. Was mir sein im meyachad. So just like he said, the mitzvah mamat l'mayla also is also a mitzvah that comes from above. Also, when we're miyached mamayla lamata, it's also we're doing it. Remember, he said this is our mitzvah. It's not just saying God is the only reality. It's our mitzvah. The mitzvah now, however, is we're doing it through the eyes of God. So he says, "Vos mir sein im miyached, vos doch chapshem fakert." Here he's coming to say, but this was chapshem fakert means here, however, he's talking about the opposite way than mamat l'mayla. The fakert is, the Rebbe Rashab explains himself. What do I mean by saying here's the opposite direction? Was früher in mamat l'mayla. Before, in the first approach from the bottom up, nehmen wir as on dem inyan von liyachde faramayla. There, it's a quality. It's an achievement that even though we're down below, we come to recognize where God is concealed. We come to recognize the godliness through existence. Mitzvah, because that's the mitzvah. Like he said before, the mitzvah is to see God through existence. Mamat l'mayla. When in mamayla mata nemir on dem liyachde fara nidrikait. So he's saying now that when we miyachid mamayla lamata, it's actually considered something like I don't say nidrikite, something inferior. No, it's a big achievement to say that in an existence that can feel itself independent of godliness, you come to recognize God. Whether it's Atzmus or not, like it is mamayla lamata, is another thing, but you are achieving something. He says the opposite way, it's a nidrikite. Because the fact of the matter is, because we're doing it, it's in a sense, it's still not on the same state of Atzmus itself. In other words, if Atzmus reveals himself without any of our doing our mitzvah, Atzmus reveals himself without any limits if he wants to. We, at the end of the day, even when we're miyachid mamayla lamata, and it has something that mamat lamata doesn't have, it's still us doing it, and therefore it's not quite as Atzmus. Basically, he's saying that there's three levels here. There's us being miyachid mamata lamayla, and then we have not Atzmus mamish. There's us being miyachid mamayla lamata. That's Atzmus, but not quite ultimate. And then there's Atzmus himself revealing himself without our mitzvah, and that would be so-called the highest level. He doesn't spell it out quite the way I just said it, but it's definitely coming across that way. So the Rebbe Rashab is adding some nuances here in this parentheses. But relative to Mamata Lamaila, even our yichud, our effort, he says, after the parentheses, Kupmen do eich tzutza atzmus. So just like when the one above is climbing, is coming down to the one below, you're getting a much more called pure version of that which is above. So through an Ayurveda, even though it's us being miyachid him, which means it has something that's not quite how he is on his own, but still, relatively seeing, we come to Atzmus. Nimtza. So Nimtza is, what do we derive, what do we conclude from this? Is doch in dem yichud, from Mamata Lamayla Kupman Nitzu to Atzmus. In the yichud Mat Lamayla, we don't quite reach Atzmus, what he means here, unfiltered. Und der Far is the Faran Nashverkeit. And that's why there's a difficulty here. Was as the gate nit abregala. It means that when doing it, you don't quite reach the destination. Bregala means it's a beautiful Yiddish word, which means like a marathon. You're running, but you didn't quite come to the finish line. Bregala is like an edge, a small little piece. So something is still missing because it's coming from below. Mele was in dem Inyan von dem Yichud Mamata Lamaila is Yadua. A second, let me just read this properly. Was the gate nita bregala? Mele was is the Inyan von dem Mamata is Yadua. No, stop. Period. So now the Rebbe Shab concludes. So after what we've just said, Mele, what do we? So therefore, what's the conclusion here? That what the Inyan of Yichud Mamata Lamaila is known. For Balabatim, it does not Yadua. For Balabatim, he means people who are more involved, not learning Chassidus necessarily, more in business. No, this is in a Fabring, and the Rebbe Rashab would sometimes say something like that. Like, in other words, talking to the Bochim who are completely immersed in learning Chassidus, we know it. For Balabatim who are not so involved in the learning of Chassidus, I'm assuming that's what he's saying here. Is das nicht Yadua. Nadoye das Yadua. But here it is known. Meaning here where we're speaking now by this crowd, so to speak. And then he concludes here, Norman Davdas Reiden. However, we have to speak about it. I guess he's saying that we need to talk about this so everybody should be aware of this level. Not so sure. I think that's what he means here. Speaking again very informally. So now comes the Srei, and you see there's now a colon. So he's now going to explain what he just said. Okay. So we finish now Zion, the Zion, page 197. Any questions? Okay. Like a stickel Farbrengen here. Rabbi Rashav's Farbrengen.
What is that third level that you referred to? Milamata Lamayla, and you said the third level. that we can reach it or not.
It's not an Aveda. The third level is completely what God would reveal on his own, not that we're being miyachid him. In other words, what he's speaking about here, the mitzvah of yichud is a mitzvah upon us, and that, which means from our perspective, or from our, in our world, we should come to appreciate how we're united with God. And that there are two levels. Mamatla Maila, which doesn't quite see Atzmus, it's more through our lens. And Maila Mata is more of Atzmus. But ultimately, it's not as Atzmus would be if he revealed himself alone without our effort altogether. So he's not really saying a third level. I just said it in order to explain that he's telling us that even Mamayla Mata, he says, is somewhat of a nidrikite. You're bringing God down a level because it's not Atzmus itself, it's how we see Atzmus himself. In other words, there's how we see the artist through the art, there's the way we see the artist through the artist, and then there's the way the artist himself would reveal himself to us would be, of course, higher, even than that second stage.
So you're saying the first two things are something we can do, and the third thing is only something that Hashem, that Atzmus can do?
Yeah, but he's not talking about it really that much. He's just qualifying to say that at the end of the day, even the higher thing we can do is still, compared to what God himself is somewhat of a lower level. Yeah, that's ultimately correct.
Thank you.
But I don't know how much he's going to talk about this third thing. We shall see. Because he's definitely talking about the mitzvah liyachid. Like in Ayin Beis, it's interesting now that we go back to Ayin Beis. In Ayin Beis, he did say how it is mitzad atzmus. And then he said, and then also in the way we're miyachid, I'm looking literally the last page. Let me see the language. Das Elyon. Yeah. So here it's interesting. He says, then he says a third level where you're uniting Is he referring to this third level we just described? Maybe. I don't want to jump to a conclusion until I read more in the Toras Sholom. But it could be that's somewhat connected.
How are you translating Nidarakite?
The Yichud Mamata Lamaila is an elevation. We take a world and we reveal how it's really the artist. The art is really is connected to the artist. When you're Miyachim Lamaila, he says you're actually bringing it down a level because not Atzmus, it's you are. So he called Nidrikite. I defined it as inferior, as lower. Nidrikite in English, in Yiddish, literal translation means lower. It's like a lower aspect, not a hechikite. He called it, he says, a maila. So maila, the opposite of equality, would be I say liability, somewhat of a, not quite.
It's like a shvilas? Like
no, it's
Google
just simply
says,
not as high as Atzmus himself.
Google says a lowliness. I'm just trying to reconcile that with what you're saying.
It's a combination of what I just said. It's like, in other words, it's the contrast to Mamata Lamaila he's talking here, is that this is valid. Since we're doing it, it ultimately has some of our side to it, even when we are doing it Mamayla Lamata.
So my question is,
okay, so it could be the third level is perhaps, I'll see whether this fits with the third level as it is in Ayin Beis, but I don't want to say anything until I read more. What were you saying?
Well, I mean, I certainly get how our effort to understand how God sees things, but like as you say, to see this on God's terms. How does God see this unity on His terms? We're still doing it because we're talking about it. We're not looking at something that God said. This is how I see it. We're trying to understand how He sees it on God's terms, as you put it. Yeah. But nevertheless, we can't possibly know that third level at all. By definition, we can't know it.
He doesn't say that. Those words, he didn't use those words.
Didn't use what words? What I just said?
We can't possibly see it that way. He doesn't use those words.
Well, it seems logical. There's our effort to see how God sees it, and then there's God's telling us how He sees it. How could we know how God actually sees it. We have to be God himself.
There's many ways you can explain it. Maybe through enough avodah, we ultimately can see it the way God sees it, like he explains in Ayin Beis. So there's many ways to explain it. Right now, correct. Right now, the what we miyachid, whether it's mamat l'mayla, maylamat, is not purely how Atzmus would reveal it on his own. That's correct. Whether we could reach that or not, we'll discuss. I'm not ready to say one way or the other.
Okay, thank you.
From the Ayin Beis, it appears, yes, that we could reach that level. But I want to see how he continues here before really rounding that out.
Putting it together. Okay, thank you.
I was thinking that maybe both milamata l'mayla, milamayla lamata, in both of these would involve some avoda. Whenever you involve avoda, it's the lens is always through us. It's just a matter of degree. But
That's correct.
Maybe that third level is when Hashem revealed himself in Torah. We had kalos and nefesh. There was no avoda here. It was such a gilui of Atzmus that we couldn't take it. But maybe in the Lasid Lavo, that level of by Yichud, purely from Lamayla Lamata, will be available to us, and we'll be able to experience it without avoda, seeing it through God, only through the lens of God himself.
That's more or less what he says in Ayin Beis. I want to see whether the Toras Sholom goes that far or not. We'll see. But he more or less says that the years of Avodah that we do, it's just like we count 49 days of the Omer, and the 50th we don't count, but God reveals it after we do 49. So God reveals what's on his terms after we do our work. So Chassidus talks about Asusa Dilatata from below could only reach that high. Then comes Asusa Dilela, which only comes from above. Then comes, after enough work below, then comes a level that only God could reveal, but it's only due to us preparing the ground below. So there's a lot of levels here. But we'll see. As I said, right now, his main emphasis is mamat l'mayla and mamayla l'mata. The third level, we'll see where he goes with this, and we'll talk about it some more. But it's correct what you're saying. In Tanya, he basically says that by Matan Torah was a me'ain, a taste of what will be l'osad love. But l'osad love, we nigla kveid Havaya, v'lo yikon afeid merecha. We will no longer need the garments. Remember, a big part of Ayin Beis is today the eye needs an outside light to see in the dark. Whereas l'osad love, the eye itself will see. So yes, we're going to get to that point. That's why I said this is all setting the stage of understanding the so-called bigger picture in Ayin Beis that the Rebbe Rashab did not end up writing out. That's where I'm headed with all of this. Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.
It has a real time in the Yiddish. It's really different when you listen to it in the Yiddish.
Yeah. The Yiddish is very, what we say in Yiddish, geschmack. You know the word geschmack?
Totally.
Yeah, geschmack means like a flavor. There's no real word in English that says geschmack in my.
Like it tastes good.
Yeah, very tasteful. Yeah, but the geschmack is even more than just. It means to taste good. That's what geschmack means. Like a geschmack inyan, when you hear something, you say, "Ah, that was very poetic or very what's that? Well-rounded, well said." You know. Look, there are certain words in Yiddish and Hebrew as well. Even in Maimorim, you'll see very often the Rebbe Rashab, you see, goes in parentheses in Yiddish, because there's something about the Yiddish language. It captures certain things. It's hard to really say. Kishkis, for example. Chutzpah. What word do you have in English that's as good as chutzpah? Nerve. That's a translation of chutzpah. You know what? You have the nerve to say that, the chutzpah. But still, it became part of the language because it has a certain oomph to it that's stronger than just nerve. You know, kishkis is like that. When someone says, it disturbed me through my kishkis, it's more than just your intestines or your guts. You know,
you're
it's like,
very core. Your core with all the way within.
But this is true in every language. They have these words that are very powerful when they're stated, and they're not just words. They also carry history. You know, Yiddish has the anguish, what they call the agony and comedy of life, lies in so many of Yiddish words. Like you say, oy vey. What word in English is oy vey? Very hard to capture it. I'm talking about a real oive, not in a comic routine or something.
Would you say that the Baal Shem Tov revealed Chassidus through Yiddish, correct?
All the Rabbeim spoke in Yiddish.
Would you say that ultimately Yiddish, I mean, you are fluent in both languages, would you say that Yiddish would be ultimately the deepest, can express godliness in a deeper way than Lashon HaKodesh?
Well, there's actually an entire sikha from the Rebbe on this. In Chelik Chaf Aleph, in volume 21 in Likutei Sichos Mishpatim, you'll see a whole sikha. I wrote it up. The Rebbe spoke about, it was then Tanya was being taught on the radio in Yiddish. The Rebbe speaks a whole sikha about the qualities of Yiddish, even over Hebrew. Check it out. Very interesting sikha. Look, the Rebbe also speaks about Targum. Like we have Targum Onkelos. Targum Onkelos is Aramaic, and yet we say it every week in Ma'avid the Sedra, Targum. There's something, Rashi brings Targum. Rashi brings words from French. There's certain words also makes it easier for a student. Yeah, there's a certain flavor in Yiddish that just captures something that's very, very hard to really. I mean, part of my work is to try to capture the spirit. I see myself as somewhat of a wordsmith a little. When you write something in English, you don't want to just translate dry translation of the word. You want to capture its spirit. And that sometimes needs more than one word. That's why you see sometimes I struggle. It's not always a literal translation of a word. How do you translate mamala kalalman? There's no one word that you can use. The energy that fills the world. It doesn't really capture the idea. Tzimtzum, kav. Yes, tzimtzum means concealment, diminishment, but there's a lot more going on than just the word. I mean, I've always looked at it this way, that the English language, like a lot of the Latin languages, is more descriptive language. Hebrew and Yiddish in some way are more metaphorical languages, which means one word in Hebrew can take a sentence in English and they say a paragraph in French. It's true. If you want to capture certain words in Hebrew, there's no way you could say the same one word. Look, in literal translations like a Siddur or a Chumash, you have no choice. So you try to keep it to one word just to be literal. But even like Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'saaretz, in the beginning God created heaven and earth. Is it quite the full meaning of the verse? Not exactly. It's the gist of it. Or other words like that, and then there's sentences that really must have a lot of it. So it's a language thing. Listen, language is all it is a tool. It's what you convey in the language. The same two people can translate the same piece, and one will be dry and not alive, and the other will bring it alive. Translation is a real art. It's not just technically knowing what the word is. They also know the spirit of the word. I mean, you have all these discussions of how, translations of War and Peace, or of some of the classics in other languages, in French or German. New translations come out and they talk about how this translation really gives it a whole other soul. It's like also music, different adaptations of Beethoven or Bach or Mozart. And, masters know how to not just translate, they give it their own particular flavor. Or a niggin. You could have one person sing the same niggin, and another person, and it makes you cry and transports you to another time and place. Yeah, so Yiddish does a lot of that. You can capture certain things in Yiddish that are really also very funny. There's a lot of comedy in Yiddish words. That's like, things that you'd never say in English in your life, I don't know if you ever hear Haken Shainik. You've heard that one? Haken Shainik, Haken Shainik. So in English, it basically means someone's making you cray. Haken Shainik means they're banging the kettle. But obviously it doesn't mean that literally. It means guys just carrying on and making you, just someone who doesn't drones on and making you crazy.
Annoying you.
By the way, the book Joys of Yiddish. Do you ever see Leo Roston's book, The Joys of Yiddish?
Sure.
Very good book. He dissects a lot of, takes Yiddish words and shows you their whole dimension behind it. You ever see that book, anyone?
Yes.
Good book. It's very funny. It's an excellent book.
It's a geschmacka book.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen it in a long time. But And also, Sholom Aleichem and guys like even Isaac Bashevis Singer. Beautiful. You ever see the video of the Isaac Bashevis Singer saying in only Yiddish, there's over 30 words to describe a crazy person. Only in Yiddish. And we don't mean crazy clinically. We mean, I'm a shuganer, a dreikop, a dos. He literally, and he goes through all of them. It's fascinating. Because in Yiddish, we always had to have names for the, for the court jester, for the shtetl fool. There's all kinds of names for somebody that's a little off.
But you would
very, 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 very good. It's a very good piece he writes. He speaks. He actually says it. His Yiddish was, of course, impeccable.
I
speak a good Yiddish, but when I see some of these, my father, for example, previous generation, whole different level. I'm like, I feel like, what does a piano have? 88 keys. My Yiddish is maybe 70 keys. When they say Yiddish, they have words that are just, it's like a whole other dimension. Yeah.
It's interesting because you would think that Lashon HaKodesh the world is created through Lashon HaKodesh specifically, not Yiddish. But again, Pnimis HaTorah was revealed in Yiddish, so there must be a.
That's what the Rebbe discusses, because Yiddish also has, if you wish, Hebrew is like, if you talk about Gilead Atzmus, Hebrew is God's language. Yiddish is God's language as experienced through the pains and joys of Jewish life. If you want, that's how I would put it.
You mean milamata lemaila and milamaila lemata, so to speak?
Both, but coming through our lives. Like Hebrew is God's word. Of course, Hebrew is ultimately the holy tongue. That's the language, that's essential language. Yiddish is that language as I said, as we lived it. As a matter of fact, there are people who Badavka don't speak Hebrew and only Yiddish because they want to use Hebrew only for holy things. And many people see, they don't want to use Hebrew for profane or even mundane matters.
Right.
The Rebbe Rashab has a whole letter about that.
Plus, it has the gematria. It's a whole different system.
Yeah, no one's taken away from Hebrew, and of course.
Oh no. I'm just saying, I'm making the distinction. That's all. This is the language of the people. That's all. It's
Yeah, but there's something about that. Yeah, listen, Aramaic Gemara. The Rebbe talks about that there. Gemara is not pure Hebrew. It's Hebrew/Aramaic. Because there's something about refining also the languages of the world with Torah. The Rebbe has a whole bunch of sikhs on this topic. There's pure Hebrew, there's like pure English, let's say, and then there's bringing them together and like refining the so-called languages of the world. When we learn Torah, for example, in English, there's a whole maimer, mishpatim, Torah. We're elevating, just like when we wear the garments of the modern world, we're elevating the so-called secular world to Torah that way.
What was the letter from?
Okay, we've digressed here a bit. Fine, talk about a little Yiddish. I'll just give you one final one that my grandmother used to always say, and it always remains with me. So when the children come to the house, and then they can make a good ruckus, a good racket. And I remember we were like little kids in my grandmother's house, turning over the whole place, as children do. And then one of my cousins came into the door, and I remember my grandmother saying, nocha tog Chanukah, nocha Chanukah lichtel. That's what she called it. Another Chanukah light. In other words, the very endearing way of saying another troublemaker has entered, making more racket. But it's said in such a loving way. You say, nocha Chanukah lichtel, nocha Chanukah, nocha tog Chanukah. Just only in Yiddish you could say something like that.
What's the Rebbe Rashab letter that you referred to that he spoke about not using Hebrew in a secular or profane?
It's all in that sikha in volume 21 in Mishpatim in the Hisafis, or Yisrei, actually Yisrei sikha, I think. Yisrei Mishpatim. It's all there in the footnotes. It's brought there. Okay, let's continue reading. Va'inyan. I'm starting the new paragraph, column 197. Here's the inyan. Now, this he's going to speak here is literally language that's very, very parallels Ayin Beis, earlier parts of Ayin Beis. The inexpressive, it says, V'yadaita yem v'shavesa levavecha ki Havaya Elokim b'shamayim v'malvaros mitachas ein oid. Full verse. Now you shall know today, and you should apply it to your heart, that Havaya is Elokim, in the heavens above and earth below, ein oid. And if you recall, Ayin Beis dissected every word of this verse, beginning from the middle of volume 2, all the way through volume 3, where we talked about ein oid. V'hainu, what does this pasuk mean? Shebezeh sheteda she'Havaya Elokim. That through this, through knowing, through the awareness that Havaya hu Elokim, and we'll soon understand what that means. B'meila teda, you'll automatically come to know sheb'shamayim imal oretz mitachas ein oid. Notice, how do you read this verse? What's the flow? That when you know and you take to heart that Havaya Elokim, then you'll also know that he's in the heavens above and on earth below, and ein oid, and nothing else but him. As it's kain dover tofelech. I'm sorry. I skipped the line. Was there?
No, you didn't.
From ein oid is, what's the meaning ein oid? Literally, it means nothing else. Ein oid. So he says, as kain dover tofelech. Not that there's nothing else. There's not even a dover tofel means something meaningless even, or like a secondary thing. You know, ikr and tofel are two words in Hebrew. Ikr means a primary thing. Tofel means like incidental, or it's not as significant. So, like you say, you have, let's say, a project. You say we must get this done, and the tofel would be not as important or not as significant. So when you say ein oid, he's saying it's not just that nothing else exists. Not even a dover tofel. There's not even even a scrap that remains. It's like you say, what? Who really cares? You have a big building, and you have a few little scraps left over. Compared to the whole building, it's nothing. It's tofel. It's in other words, not just secondary or meaningless. It's completely like nullified almost. So also dover tofel. As they teach the Rebbe in Shar Yichud V'Amunah. Yeah, the Rebbe Rashab talks in on the language. That's how the Alter Rebbe teaches. When he says the Rebbe, he usually means the Alter Rebbe. He teaches that in Shar Yichud V'Amunah Perek Vov. As ein oid is, as the tokein dover tofel. Ein oid means not just there's nothing else, there's not even a dover tofel. Al derech v'Yehuda v'oid l'kra. So v'Yehuda means brings Yehuda v'oid l'kra, and also an additional proof. But the v'oid there doesn't mean just additional; it means like even a secondary. Is nida pirush ein oid. So the Alter Rebbe's chiddush is that it's not the meaning of ein oid v'meret umadum. Everywhere when you say ein oid, as Atzmus is faranan, that God exists, unchutzim is kain mitzias nit faranan, and besides him, no existence exists. Nothing else exists. He's saying more than that. The Alter Rebbe's chiddush ein oid is not just that God exists and nothing else exists besides him. No doret min in ein oid wie the Rebbe teached, as the token dover tofelech. There's also not even even a smidgen of something else. In other words, the regular interpretation would not necessarily negate something that is tofel. That seems like what he's saying. And the Alter Rebbe makes it clear that nothing, absolutely nothing. No, it's total, absolute exclusivity. I think he's going back to the words he used earlier, that we're not obligated to be miyachid more than that. That's the ultimate miyachid. Remember, he said earlier that mechuyev only Atzmus, not Atzilus, and so on. Not sure why he's mentioning it again here, but maybe he's just saying that the Alter Rebbe is adding that once you say basically, it's like it's not just 99% God is everywhere. It's 100%. You don't need to add any more. That's really it covers the total, all-encompassing yichud, basically. And I remember I was once asked a question: why, when you put, let's say, we go into a mikveh, you're supposed to go on all the way, and you're not supposed to have any chetzitza. Like if you have a Band-Aid or something, I'm not talking about life-threatening. A Band-Aid or something that's stuck on you, you're supposed to remove it all. Same thing when
Like
you,
a ring.
let's say, let's see.
A ring.
Same thing when you put the example when a tefillas kalim, when you take a new vessel or something like a new plate or a new piece of cutlery, you put into them and you take off all the labels. So I remember someone asked me in one of the classes, why is it important to take off every label? So I explained because bittul, tefillah is the letters habitl, it says in Chassidus. Tefillah means complete submerging yourself in a higher reality, in water. Water represents mehadas hatoyer, represents godliness. And I said, when it comes to immersion of total devotion, you can't say 99% of me is devoted to you, but 1% is not, because it's not a quantity thing; it's a quality thing. If a soldier in the military will say 99% I'm dedicated to my task, but 1% I'm not. No, devotion is you're married, you're totally married. You're not married to half of you, or a quarter of you, or 3/4 of you. So when it comes to, let's say, submerging something, it's not. And I remember it was people never heard that before. There was a very interesting reaction. My point is that Ein Eid, what the Alter Rebbe is adding, it's not just that God is 99.9% of your life, but there's something where God doesn't exist in a certain area. True yichud is saying it's complete in that sense, and that's maybe why he's adding more than this. We're not compelled. Actually, there is nothing more. What else can you say more than that? I'm talking about from the point of view of existence. So now he's going to go back to the pasuk. Havaya Elokim, like what is the sequence here? Anybody wants to ask something? Okay. So it says like this now. Mela that inyan was ki Havaya Elokim is. So mela is a word in Yiddish that when you're speaking informally, sometimes throughout these words, mela. In other words, he's continuing saying, so like to continue where I left off, what is the inyan Havaya Elokim? Varim kol eir kol mitzias vet al-yidei tzimtzum. Every eir, meaning anything that's not Atzmus, any manifestation, a relation, and kol mitzias, everything comes through Tzimtzum. There has to be some pause, because you're moving from one state to another state. Das wird angerufen. Let me see how he reads this. This is what it means. This is what we describe, that it's becoming distant from Atzmus. Nisrachim doesn't mean distant. It means it's moved away from the core essence. So as soon as something is not the core essence, that means there's some form of tzimtzum going on. Yemel vet er umitzias. Once there's some so-called pause, like from teacher to student, there's some pause, that's what allows for Ur to become an entity of its own, and Mitzias to become an entity. So even though Ur is bottle and completely dedicated, completely nullified, but it's still a Mitzias of something, of Ur. So he says it's all through a tzimtzum, through a pause. And then the Rebbe Rashab is going to speak very informally here. He says, I'm not afraid to say, as Atzilus is Atzmus, that even Atzilus, which is such a high world, we spoke before, Yichud, Elam Achdus, is also distant from Atzmus. And then he says like this, Ich weiß nicht, was Atzilus is. I don't know what Atzilus is. I mean, it means I don't know exactly what Atzilus is. No, das weiß ich. But what I do know is, as Atzilus wird nicht gewähnt meruchik bin Atzmus, wird das nicht gewähnt wie Itzter. That if Atzilus was not removed from Atzmus, it would not be the way it is right now. Interesting expression. In other words, I can't tell you exactly what Atzilus is, but one thing I know for sure, that it's a step outside of Atzmus. Or not a step, that is some distance. Now, violence is meruchik bin Atzmus, but being that Atzilus has some being removed from Atzmus, removed, remember, doesn't mean outside of. It means that it doesn't capture the full intensity of what Atzmus is. The Fazayin Nesava geworden den Nevroim von Atzilus. Because if Atzilus was not Meruchik, you would never have the creations coming from Atzilus. The fact that Atzilus is already removed to some extent, even though it's completely saturated with godliness, but it's not Atzmus. Therefore, the Nivroim of Bria and Yitzir Asir could be created from Atzilus. So the Rebbe Rashab qualifies this. He says, Mele, as menzok Nivroim, I want to just let you know, when I say Nivroim here, stellt sich das in the Eigen. It jumps out in your eyes. Because where are we talking about Nivroim now? We're talking about Atzilus. So he says, no, memain the Nitzayim for Atzilus. I'm not really focusing now on the creations. I mean, anything that will come out of Atzilus. So if Atzilus was not removed somewhat from Atzmus, meaning that it's not quite the level of Atzmus, you'd never be able to have anything emerge from Atzilus because it would be too close to the sun, so to speak. And therefore, they'd not be capable. You need to have some Tzimtzum. That's essentially what he's saying. I remember the language here is very informal. So he'll say things he wouldn't say in a mimer. Like he's speaking, it jumps in the eyes. I'm not afraid of saying, I don't know what Atzilus is exactly, but I do know this. Just remember, this is very informal language of a Sikha that the Rebbe Rashab is speaking to the Chassidim. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What is the logic in saying that there couldn't be three lower worlds beyond if Atzilus were like Atzmus? That if the somehow the creation of Yesh Me'ayin, as we understand it, couldn't occur without some intermediate step where it's still very high, Kula Elokus, it's all Elokus, but nevertheless, why couldn't a creation with a deep enough a big enough, dimensionally deep enough Tzimtzum, why couldn't I come from Atzmus, let's say, for example, like, straight out of it? I mean, I could. So why is he saying I couldn't?
I'm not sure. Just I gave the example. Let's say, why does the sun have to be so distant from Earth for us to be able to receive its light? Atzmus in its full intensity without Tzimtzum, it just would not allow room for anything. So what he's saying here is that
Atzilus, but the Tzimtzum, there's a Tzimtzum between Atzilus
and that Tzimtzum creates Atzilus, which in turn creates the lower levels.
But there could be an Atzilus between Atzmus and Biyah, for example. Let's say you skipped Atzilus. I mean,
Tzimtzum and Atzilus here go hand in hand. Tzimtzum creates Atzilus. That's what makes Atzilus Atzilus. Atzilus is a divine structure that is removed from Atzmus because of the Tzimtzum. That's what he's saying.
Okay, I'll drop it. We're going to talk about it afterwards, but I'm not sure I follow that logic. He's saying there's a step down station, if you will, like power, transmission of power. And I couldn't plug in my phone in my wall if there wasn't a step down between the power line and the plug in my house. But suppose
it's the whole purpose of Seder Shtalshlus, that in order for it to make sense, why do you need a Tzimtzum? God can do anything. But the Tzimtzum is the concealment that allows the energy to be diffused enough that it can then create. So he says, basically saying that he's not afraid to say that Atzilus is also distant from Atzmus, even though it's a very high spiritual divine world, because Atzilus would not, for Atzilus, if we're not distant, if we're not removed, we wouldn't be able to have the creation come from it, things to come from it. That's what he's basically saying. So it's all connected.
Okay.
Nimtza. So we derive from this as Eir. Nimtza is as Eir Mitzias that Aidation is Slachik min Atzmus. That the existence of Eir and Mitzias, even Eir and Mitzias and existence, is a result of it becoming more distant, meaning somewhat more concealed from Atzmus. V'hamoshel b'zeh yedua, the example for this is known from letters of thought and letters of speech. When you speak, the letters are more tangible, they're more discernible and more palpable el azulas to the other. When I speak, you hear words, you hear letters. Because because the energy that's being conveyed in the words of speech are more concealed. So the more the Oyer is concealed, the more the letters, like the containers, become more tangible, more palpable. El azulas, to the other. The Eisis HaMachshava, by contrast, letters of thought, Einim Negoshim Rak La'atzmei. Nobody knows what you're thinking. It's not felt, it's not discerned, it's not tangible, only to yourself. Mipnei Shemeir Sham Gili Eiser, being that there, the intensity of your ideas that are being thought of are stronger. The Eisis Shebeseichlim Rak Eisis Nekorim. V'lo Eisis Negoshim. And the Eisis in Seichel, and intelligence that remains in thought, are Eisis Nekorim. They're recognizable. In other words, you can think in context of letters and words, but they're not Negoshim. They're not tangible to the point that another can hold on to it. So no one can just read your thoughts, but their words that you say are like handles that a zulas, another can relate to. Okay. That's due to being a Gili Eliezer. So what do you see from this? That the closer you are to the source, the less tangible things are. And for things to become an entity, they need to be somewhat removed from the source, or at least somewhat distanced. To the point that the letters in the core soul, there, that we know that the soul itself contains letters. They're altogether not a mitzias. It's just like the source of letters come from there, but they're not at all in any way mitzias, not to you and not to another. We have to say that they exist there, because why they have to exist? Because that's what makes this person a human being, a nefesh ha'medaber, person who's able to speak, is because not just because they have a mouth that speaks, because they have esis within their very soul. It's a whole discussion about this that we learned as well in Ayin Beis. But there, umameli yesham esis, they're letters. Omnam eichem ha'esis shebenefesh einonu yedim. But in what form and fashion they take, what shape they take, we don't know at all. Klal, next page, 198. We have to believe that's how it is. That's the truth. So basically, what do we see from this? Wherever there's more light, there's less tangible mitzias. The light basically overwhelms the keli, if you wish, or the esis in this case. Is a dos is given mitzias. He's going now back to what he started with Havaya Elokim. He started talking about Tzimtzum. That's so when you have Oyer, that you could say, here's a tangible dimension called Oyer, light, or mitzias, existence. Tzimtzum. That means because the Oyer that was there, the intensity has been somewhat diminished or concealed, and that's why it leaves room for something to emerge. Oyer and mitzias. Okay. Now it continues, and you'll recognize very closely the ideas we just learned in Ayin Beis, the last few pages. Omnom v'hine legabe Atzmus einat Tzimtzum master. This is only from our perspective. Legabe Atzmus, the Tzimtzum does not conceal. Mipnei shekeich haTzimtzum agam ken keich Atzmus, like we learned, because the keich haTzimtzum is also a power of Atzmus. Just like the power of Gili. So when God restrains, a teacher, for example, is restraining himself and not revealing, for him that doesn't affect, he's not concealed by him, that itself is his power. Just like the power to reveal. And the example for this, is also from the power of intelligence, of Seichel. Seichel has the power to reveal, a power to conceal. And the koyach to conceal, the power to conceal, does not conceal on the power to reveal from the point of view of the mashpia. Because it's also coming from his own, the teacher has decided, I'm going to speak about something, and I'm not going to say everything. That's also part of his process of expression. And that's why it doesn't conceal on the Koyach HaGilish Shalei. The same things above. Being that the power to conceal is also Koyach Atzmus, therefore it doesn't cover up, it doesn't conceal on the Gili. Is Meir Gili Ein Sof b'kol mokem. So from that perspective, Ein Sof is revealed, it shines everywhere. There's nothing in existence that's outside of him. Because even though it's concealed from our point of view, from him to the point, so he's everywhere. It's just that we don't see it. Because we are limited. Is nitfaran kein shum mitzias. So the truth, therefore, is that there's no real mitzias that's separate. The separation is only due to the tzimtzum from our side of the curtain, so to speak. No, doch nit mechuyev liyachid dem ein sof. But here it goes back now. But we are not obligated to be miyachid ein sof, even though ein sof is everywhere from that perspective. But that's not the mitzvah on ein sof. Just like we don't have to be miyachid elam atzilus, like we learned earlier. We also don't have to be miyachid the atzilus and macrocosm, which is ein sof before the tzimtzum.
Why is he saying that? It seems totally contrary to Shema.
Let me finish. I'll explain everything. Because atzilus the klolos, atzilus and macrocosm is the infinite divine light before the tzimtzum, like we learned that length a number of times in Ayin Beis. Is dafben dosereid mitzada atzmus. What we have to do, we have to speak about it from the perspective of Atzmus, not from the perspective of Atzmus revelation, which is Ein Sof. As Alts is called Batzmusi, that everything is encompassed in Atzmus, it does violence, it does be a dias Atzme Yedea Kol HaNivraim. Because from God's perspective, by knowing himself, he knows everything that exists, because everything that exists is coming from within him. It does be Atzmus is Neses HaNivraim. So it's all how Atzmus carries within him all of the Nivraim, all of creation. And he knows them all within through Yediyas Atzmei, through knowing himself. Like the Rambam says, we know things outside of ourselves. I know there's a table, I know there's a chair. It's not because I know myself. If I knew myself alone, the chair and table are not within me. But when we talk about Atzmus, Atzmus encompasses everything. We see a table and a chair because we're seeing it after the Tzimtzum. But from Atzmus' point of view, he's seeing it all as basically all encompassed within him. Everything is encompassed in Atzmus. As this is nitfaran came mitzias klal. Going back to Einaid. So there's no mitzias but him. But then now he still has to explain what does that mean. We know there is an existence. It's like we learned in Ayin Beis. So, but I'll stop right here if there are any questions. But the bottom line, what he's saying is like this, that the concept of total exclusivity, that there's only a God, and God encompasses everything, and nothing but God, Einaid, not just Einaid Mavadeh, is only Atzmus. The fact that Ein Sof was chosen by God to express himself, which is a revelation, and yes, and Ein Sof therefore is everywhere, even if we don't see it, is not Atzmus. It's Atzmus choosing to express himself, and that Ein Sof, there's going to be a Tzimtzum. First of all, just for there to be you need a Tzimtzum. Atzmus to create means already he's done something that's somewhat removed. But especially the after the Tzimtzum is very powerful The Kav is going to create. But it's already, like he said, Meruchak min Etzem. So Yichud is reserved completely for Atzmus, not even for the that comes from Atzmus, Lifnei Tzimtzum, what he calls Atzilas the close. Which I can explain many ways why he's emphasizing this, but bottom line is that's the conclusion, that it's totally Atzmus because there's only one God, and even the that comes from Atzmus is still not Atzmus. It's still not Atzmus itself, and our connection is straight with the core. That's what Chassidus wants. We're connecting to Atzmus itself, not just to his reflection, like we learned in Ayin Beis, that even highest levels of is already a Metzias Nimtza. That's why, like he said here, the to be Megala and the to be Mailim are both coming from both are coming from Atzmus, and Atzmus, they're equal. Like we learned about the two levels of Ayin, the two levels of the Galas La'atzme, the Lazulose, or the Keyach Gili, the Keyach Tzimtzum. All part of that oneness that's reserved for Atzmus. So only in Atzmus do you have that aspect. Oyer is a Gilui where it manifests what Atzmus is like. So we have it also in the world of Giluyim, but it's still one step down. It's the level of Gilui. And we do want to reveal that level of Yichud. That's why you have Oyer. But what are we revealing? The Yichud of that Yichud from the level of Atzmus. Kel Deus Havaya is an Atzmus. Okay.
Right. So if that's the case, everything you just said, why does he say we're not obligated to liyachad atzmus? It's dafka, the whole point of it.
Liyachad atzmus, not liyachad erein sof.
Oh, that's what he said. Okay.
Yeah.
That we are obligated to. He says, where does he say it?
He says only atzmus. He says nit is nit faranke. He says like this: nit mechuyev liyachad dem erein sof, but atzmus. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I misinterpreted that.
But how does that relate to Yehuda Ilah and Yehuda Tata? I mean,
I would wait till we
okay.
read more before I get
Okay.
there.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Let me see here. Shall we continue reading here?
But isn't to Robin's question a little bit? Isn't Yichud Ilah the idea of liyachad b'chinas atzilus tekalos?
I don't know. Too early to tell. You could speculate, but I wouldn't speculate since there's more to read. So I'd like to read further and see whether he does or he doesn't explain it.
Because if it is Yichud Ilah, then we are mechayiv. If it is Yichud Ilah, then we are mechayiv.
He has not used the language Yichud Ilah, Yichud Tata yet, so I don't want to speculate where that fits in here.
But we know it from Ayin Beis.
I don't.
I thought you said,
which I say so.
I thought you explained Yichud Ilah in various ways, but one of them was the Yichud of Atzilus to Klaus with the creation.
Anyway, I don't want to yet make the connection time base. I want to learn what we learn here, and then we'll see how much we can connect and what we can't connect. I'm not, as I said, you can speculate. I don't have a clear, definitive answer to that at this point.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. Is Yichud Ilah Mamayla Lamata, Yichud Tah Mamata Lamayla possible? But I said I don't want to jump till we read it all. Then we can see how it all comes together.
Okay, thank you.
I'll read a few more lines because it's interesting. He says, Omnom, based on this, that there's no Metzias from the point of view of Atzmus, lefizeh kum daches as is God in the Savigavan. So according to this, from the point of view of Atzmus, nothing was created. Omnom ef shalem came. However, we can't say that. Because there's a Shem Elokim, which is a divine name. Reishis bar Elokim is the Das Hashem, is Das Emes. So that's Havaya Elokim. We're not saying if he didn't say, the fact is that it's also coming from the Tzimtzum Elokim is a name of God. The name of God means that it's true. It's a semis. There's also a name called Elokim. Umamel is Farana Hester. That means there's an emes to the concealment. That means that there's a bechina, there's a level of a mitzias of a yesh, which is a concealment. So how do we reconcile the two? Now you see here, this is very much what he spoke about in Ayin Beis. He asked that question at the bottom of page 1474. He said, if from Atzmus' point of view, everything is one, he says, it's almost the same language. So then he said, at the end of Ayin Beis, he said, but because the Savas is all within Atzmus. So that's what he says here now. So we say here, nothing conceals. So therefore, all of existence is as is within Atzmus, but there is an existence. What does that mean? Because the concealment, the Shem Elokim, is how it's encompassed in Atzmus. Because the name Elokim, which is the power to conceal, is also a level of Atzmus. That's why it doesn't conceal and cover up on Atzmus, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So the Hester is encompassed within Atzmus. Is dos kumtun su as es is verlane Hester omnam Hester kol batzmuse. So what have we added here? We've added to what we said earlier, that there is a Hester, but the Hester is encompassed in Atzmus. In other words, there's very concealment that for us, on this side of the curtain, does not allow us to see God. For God, there's also, it exists. But for him, it's a koyach, it's his power. It's just the teacher, when he's teaching something, and he chooses willingly, deliberately, not to reveal something. For whatever reason, he's holding back or withholding a certain detail. The student won't understand it, whatever it may be. That withholding is just as much him as what he's saying. So we're not saying there's no power to withhold, but the power to withhold is not a concealer for him. It's just another way of expressing himself. He's expressing by withholding. So now the Rebbe Rashab, understanding that this is not an easy thing to wrap your head around, he says like this: "Is odos vesim mir nit." You don't really understand this. Wie das fort? How does it, end of the day, how does it work exactly? He's saying we don't know how it actually works. As es is Farana Hester, that there's an actual concealment, it is kol batzmuse, and it's encompassed in Atzmus. Vesim in it. We don't really know how or the dynamics of it. Warum wie sollen wir sagen, als es ist nicht nesavig geworden? Because how can we say that it wasn't created? Können wir das nicht sagen? We can't say it wasn't created because it was created. Weil the Shem Elokim is Hashem Emes. So we have to say there's a true name, a name of Hashem called Elokim. What then? Was then is yen nesavig geworden? Hein wie das kol batzmuse. So since you're saying it was created, at the same time, how do we say that it's encompassed in Atzmus? Was then soll man sagen, as der Hester is a Havaya. So one way you can explain it is maybe that the Hester is only for a temporary concealment. In other words, something did happen. There was for a temporary concealment, and then immediately it went back all encompassed within Atzmus. But is not satisfied with that either, the Rebbe Rashab says. Hein wie is the Weile? What's going on even for this temporary moment? Was then soll man sagen? So then another way to say it is maybe that Atzmus geht noch dem Koyach Hester. That Atzmus, so to speak, is following this power of concealment, Azevi azach was gate noch azach. Like one thing is following another thing. No, das is aber echt nicht moving. That too is not understood. Is dort der gate nit abregela. So here we can't really fully abregela. He's using the word again. We can't fully get to the bottom of it. We have to rely on faith, on amunah. Here again, he says, more than that, it can be expected of us. We have to try our best to try to understand this paradox. More than that can be expected of us. Is das verstehen wir as es is as we understand that's how it is. No, wir verstehen dem echo mahu, but we don't understand how it is. We know it's for sure this way, but we don't know how, the dynamics. Wie das. No mehr sein min nit nochiv. But that more than that is not expected from us. Umadav das lozna famuna. He repeats again, we need to rely on faith. When in Atzmus it does mistame recht, in Atzmus is probably right. In other words, v'zeu eifon hayichud shemil mata l'mayla. And this is the manner of yichud from the bottom up. So this last piece was a little dense, a lot of information. Basically, the Rebbe Rashab is struggling here and is doing it very openly in a Sikha language, in this informal language. What exactly is going on here? You know, from our point of view, it's concealed, fine. But from Atzmus' point of view, is it there? Is it not there? So he's saying we can't fully wrap our head around and get to the bottom of it. And he negated different ways of saying that maybe Atzmus does get bound by the concealment for a while, didn't accept that, or that what did it say this? We can't say that wasn't created because something was created. So he's saying bottom line is that's how it is, but we don't have full understanding. And he's calling this yichud mamata lamayla. That's an interesting thing here. This is all us trying to understand the yichud with Atzmus mamata lamayla from the way we exist. That needs explanation. That I'm not sure exactly what he means by that. The next paragraph is going to go mamayla lamata. So I need to figure out why did he call this mamata lamayla.
Maybe it's because we're trying to figure it out. That very fact that we're trying to make sense of it makes it lamata lamayla.
That's correct. That's true. But then what is mamayla lamata?
Is the problem that
how the
are in
Abraham sees it.
No, I think the meaning is, because I see the next line is like this. So here we said the Hester, the concealment, is kol batzmuse, meaning that also is the power of Atzmus. I see the next paragraph he's going to say, mamayla lamata is that the Hester gufa is Atzmus, like Ein, like we learn in Ayin Beis, that the Hester itself is Atzmus, not just the power. But we need to read it. I need to read more to be able to fully.
When he says it exists, this paradox, is he referring to Atzmus as contrasted against Shem Elokim, or as contrasted against the entire Bria, like Abia?
He's only referring to Elokim here, which is the Tzimtzum, which is the power of Tzimtzum that ultimately would create the rest of the worlds.
Right.
Now
so it's technically Shem Elokim, but technically it's both, right?
Well, because Elokim is the root of existence.
Right.
Basically, what he said was that Oira Metzias needs to go through Elokim, a Tzimtzum, a Richuk. But that Richuk itself, from Atzmus' point of view, is also Shem Emes. So it's not really a Richuk, it's just a concealment from our point of view. Yeah, so the reason it's Mamat Lamayla most likely is because we're talking after the Tzimtzum here. We're trying to understand it from the eyes, like after the Tzimtzum, we're trying to understand what it's like from God's point of view. But we still have to understand the difference. We'll get there. I don't have it all figured out. That's my point.
Is the problem that we just
the Rebbe Rashab is struggling. I definitely we're also struggling. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I was thinking as you were talking about it, that the problem is that we think in time, we're in time. So we can't understand what it's like to, I mean, that this is the paradox that Hashem is and was and will be all at the same time, that we process these things through our experience of this came first, that came second, I don't know. That's just a thought I had.
That's a general concept, but at the end of the day, it's all conceptual time. It's not real time. This is happening all the time, what we're discussing here. So it's only stages, like, conceptual time in that sense. In other words, if you're looking from Atzmus' point of view, don't think of it as past, present, and future. You'd say all the time there's a whole bunch of things happening, like that. Not as in the yesterday, today, and tomorrow, but rather all within that dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Which is just, I think, a hard concept for people to...
I think we'll understand the mamat lamayla better when we do the mamayla lamata. Then we could contrast them. It's very hard to...
But I think the question, Robin, of whether Shem Elokim exists independent of Atzmus or is part of Atzmus is really separate from the issue of time. It's truly a paradox, because what he's saying here is, on the one hand, from Atzmus' perspective, it's all one. That's what he chooses to reveal, what he chooses not to reveal. It's all within him, and yet he's saying Shem Elokim is real because it's a real name of God. It's true. It's Emes, and it's also the source of all creation, as we understand the creation. So it's a true paradox, and that, to me, it's not related to time. Maybe, I don't know. I guess, how do you solve a paradox? Maybe, but I don't know that there's anything here explicitly that connects it with time per se. It's truly a paradox. It's how can they both be true at the same time? That's the issue. It's literally the definition of paradox.
Well, you just said at the same time, so.
No, well,
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Now you're really making things complicated.
Okay, I think that, as I said, the contrast between the two types will be understood only after we read the second one. It's not just a matter that we are being miyached him, because also mamayla lamatas we're doing. Everything is us doing. It's just a difference between two ways of seeing existence and God's relationship. So right now he said kol batzmusei, and we don't fully understand it, but we understand that power concealment. The truth is, the example of the teacher, to me, makes it pretty clear. I'm not sure even why the Rebbe Rashab says we don't fully understand. A teacher who withholds something, from the teacher's point of view, it's exactly the same thing as if he reveals. What difference does it make? It's only from the student. But still, the Rebbe Rashab is saying this. That I would wait till we fully, I'm going to stop here anyway. So we'll stop here at the bottom of 198. Quite, as I hope you see how the relations of this is with Ayin Beis, because he's really talking very similar ideas. And I think it's going to help understand it all. But it's complex, so be it. That's part of the paradox. Look, you see he's struggling here not to just say, Nimna Nimnois, God can do anything, so he could have concealment and reveal. I mean, he wants to try to understand it as much as possible, and that which we can't, we leave, so to speak, for faith. But he's not just dismissing the whole thing, that the whole thing is God's domain, we can't get it, because there is a mitzvah for us to appreciate as much as we can. He says more than we can, more than we're able to, is not our responsibility. Our mitzvah is to try as best as possible to understand this paradox, so to speak. Now, well, I think, as I said, we'll learn the next piece, then we'll come back to this and start comparing. Because a lot of pieces here, a lot of things that he said, trying to figure out all the details of it. But we'll get there. Anyway.
Maybe when you review it, it'll become a little clearer.
No, it's going to take a few times. We'll get there. As I said, we're moving along. We have 1, 2, 3 more pages. We'll be there.